From Vox Day's BLOG headline. Now it is science. Okay, you can all stop sending this to me now. Look, I don't think anyone should have been terribly shocked by news of the scientific link between atheism and autism, which supports my original hypothesis from 4 years ago. People with mild forms of autism are more likely to be atheists, according to a controversial new study, and more likely to shun organized religion in general. The study, which looked at posts on autism forums, focused on people with high-functioning autism such as Asperger's. The study, from University of Boston, speculates that common autistic spectrum behaviors such as a preference for logical beliefs and a distrust of metaphor and figures of speech could be responsible. The amusing thing about the vehement reaction by many atheists to my description of their observable tendency toward socially autistic behavior is that it was not only based on my personal observations over the years, but also by the Asperger's quotient results proudly reported by dozens of the Internet's most militant atheists. But the link should have always been obvious, because it is logically inevitable. Even if one believes that a god is nothing but a social construct, it should not be hard to grasp that a degree of social dysfunction would tend to inhibit one's understanding of those constructs. Now, obviously God blindness will take a variety of forms, just as color blindness does. My belated discovery of my own very mild color blindness has, in some ways, helped me understand what Brent Rasmussen once described as a missing sense more than my long-time agnosticism ever did. You can explain it to me all you like, you can walk me slowly and patiently through all the lines on the image, but I am still not going to see it. Even if I trust that it is there, I simply cannot see it, and no amount of desire allows me to detect it. It is perhaps worth recalling that just as my color blindness is totally undetectable by others, whereas the total or red-green versions are readily observable to anyone paying attention to the individual's behavior, God blindness is not going to automatically translate into full-blown new atheist social autism. What is slightly misleading about the article's description of these socially autistic individuals is that what is described as a preference for logical beliefs should actually be phrased as a preference for beliefs that appear to be logical. For, as we have repeatedly seen, socially dysfunctional atheists tend to be extraordinarily illogical, to such an extent that they will deny the existence of straightforward dictionary definitions in use for hundreds of years in order to cling to their pseudo-logic. It's not so much logic as static rules that appeal to them. Where the cognitive deficiency is revealed is in their inability to understand that the decision tree they have adopted with quasi-religious fervor is insufficiently dynamic. I suspect it is somehow related to their concomitant emotional immaturity, as I see a similar problem with static decision trees all the time in children's soccer. Literal photographic unquestioning, unthinking, obedient mind. For example, you might tell a young defender to closely mark number 12 because he is the most dangerous striker on the other team. Then you will watch in disbelief as that defender obediently stays wide and out of the play at number 12's side instead of moving into the center and attacking the other striker who has the ball and is heading for a shot on goal. What a young defender doesn't understand that the order to mark the one player is a conditional one, and that the order should no longer be considered in effect once a greater danger to the goal presents itself. So, it's necessary to keep building more and more complex decision trees as the player develops until the light bulb goes off, the logical bases underlying all the various trees are finally understood, and the defender can begin thinking and analyzing the situations for himself rather than simply attempting to identify which branch of the decision tree applies to the present situation. An inability or dislike for processing dynamic different situations has nothing to do with logic per se. It is simply a need for clear-cut rules that remove any necessity for active thinking. To the socially autistic, both science and reason are perceived as the legitimate rule-givers, and they represent far more than the simple tools they are to the neurotypical. Of course, it is more than a little ironic that those who claim to be free thinkers and paragons of logic are actually exhibiting illogical behavior that is fundamentally based on an aversion to thinking. And here I add, chaps. And it looks like pseudoskeptics are physical adults, simply mentally marooned in the under 12 literal mind/photographic memory brain. Their maturizing hormonal surge at age 12 is disrupted/rendered ineffective, thus they do not develop the normal adult metaphorical mind, which severely retards their intellectual development. Metaphorical thinking is rapid shorthand, and greatly speeds the adult intellectual process. Skeptics' non-understanding of metaphors is noteworthy. The only metaphors they use are typically obscenities, which they seem to mean quite literally, and the few other metaphors used are always so totally extreme, it betrays their complete lack of measure in metaphor usage, a major flaw in their brain development. A major competence deficit. Whether the skeptics being marooned in the under 12 literal mind state is permanent or not fascinates some. Non-understanding of metaphors likely prevents the autistic skeptic's understanding of religions, which are giant archipelagos of metaphors, nothing more. Seemingly connected in impossible illogical ways to the literal mind. Being totally literal-minded also might explain their disabling obsessive materialism. For any belief suggesting invisible connections between things requires an immediate metaphor to be generated in the listener's mind, not possible for some with the under 12 literal photographic mind. The missing activity in those dysfunctional literal listeners seems to be the aversion to thinking that prevents metaphors being generated in the skeptic's mind. Depression equals non-thinking. Whether this state of mind of adult skeptics being marooned in the under 12 literal mindset is permanent in adults is an exciting question. Dr. Norman Boyd, in his book The Brain That Changes Itself, says repeatedly that most of our scientific brain assumptions are quite false, specifically those about brain dysfunction permanency and the attendant mistaken belief of hopelessness, and that many apparently hopeless autisms have been reversed with simple therapies. Dr. Boyd says childhood depression, non-thinking, and trauma has a miniaturizing effect on the growing child's brain size, and I suspect that plays a role in producing James Randi's online pseudo-skeptic brigade. Dr. Boyd's book, based on the latest brain scan science of 300 peer-reviewed studies, asserts that positive behavior and thinking does reverse numerous brain deficits. Buy this book, guys.